This exhibition, Enclosing some Snapshots, is set up chronologically, tracing Brady's photography from the 1930s through the 1960s. So I'm just going to share a bit in terms of what was going on in those decades for Brady, because I think it's important to contextualize his photography with what was going on both socially, politically, with Métis and First Nations communities in the Northern Prairies at the time he was taking these photographs. The 1930s were formative years for James Brady. During this decade, he joined the new Métis Association of Alberta, along with fellow political leader and activist Malcolm Norris. And in this exhibition, you'll be seeing and hearing more about Malcolm Norris, because he was one of Brady's closest confidants, and also together they were very politically active. So Malcolm Norris began a lifelong friendship and commitment to socialist politics with Brady, and Brady was fully immersed in organizing and advocating for the Métis settlements in Alberta. And again, we have to recognize at this juncture in time, the Métis were very much reliant on script. They were, their rights were basically being ignored by both federal and provincial governments. So it was very much a time of building a cohesive response to that, and a community response that was necessary for the aspirations of the Métis communities. So Brady's photographs from the 1930s are very much reflective of this. You'll see it in crowd shots, you'll see it in his photography, which tends to look more at activities that were going on that within those communities, I think, to show a viable economic basis for the rights of these Métis settlements in Alberta. Let's go to the 1940s. As was his wont, Brady wore many hats during this decade. Let's look at some of those hats he wore: unpaid community organizer, paid supervisor, negotiator, and finally volunteering as a soldier. The 1940s also saw Brady move to northern Saskatchewan, along with Malcolm Norris, and was a period in which he traveled to many communities. And we see that reflected in the photographs representing the 1940s. You see I had much more photographs to choose from, and I also see that at this time his camera kind of got more intimate, more personal, more closer to his subjects. And I think that was an evolution of Brady's, not just his photography skills and his comfort with holding a camera, but also his conceptual idea of what he was doing with his photographs. By now, Brady's name was well known in the Métis and Cree communities he visited. In 1943, Brady joined the army after initially being deemed unsuitable due to his Communist Party affiliations. He went overseas and served in Holland, where he was injured twice during his service. Let's go to the 1950s. After the Second World War, Brady was briefly in Alberta before moving back to northern Saskatchewan. He took on various supervisory jobs, working with the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, the CCF, the precursor to the modern-day NDP, and no doubt, his cynicism toward the provincial and federal governments increased greatly during this decade. This was a result of the lack of progress made in negotiations, talks toward the settlements, etc., and perhaps also Brady's own growing sense of, I don't want to say despondency, but I would say a certain cynicism which we see reflected in his writing towards some of the more utopian visions he had, and realizing how difficult or next to impossible it would be to achieve those visions. Let's move on to the 1960s. Brady was a fixture in communities like Cumberland House and LaRange, Saskatchewan. His reputation on several levels had become almost legendary in Indian country. It was also at this time that his Snapshots can be regarded as framing community history, such as his candid portraiture of the women and men of settlements like Cumberland House. These images are a lasting photographic treatment to Métis and Cree dignity, resilience that persisted despite decades of impoverishment and bankrupt government policy. In 1967, James Brady, along with his friend Absalom Halkett, disappeared in the Foster Lake region of Saskatchewan. they were never found. In particular, let's look at the community of Cumberland House, which a lot of these photographs, many of these photographs from the 50s and 60s are chosen from. He spent time in Cumberland House, and he seemed to have done almost like a census kind of approach to getting the photographs of everyone in the community, from children to men to women. And these photographs are remarkable, not just as a community record, but as one goes through the archives, and I've gone through my fair share of archives, there's one thing that stands out, I think, with Brady's photographs, and that is the amount of women in these photographs. They're more than half of the Cumberland House photographs, and this is at a time when the photography gaze, particularly towards Indigenous communities, was primarily male. It was primarily focused on things like powwows, regalia, a kind of reverberation of the Edward S. Curtis romanticism of the vanishing race, of tradition, etc. Brady's photos are not that. Brady's photographs are of communities in transition. They reflect Métis and Cree people and communities as ever-changing, as adapting to new ways of being, of adapting new technologies, of kinships and family relations that are vibrant and alive and exist within themselves and are often not captured by an outsider gaze. Because of Brady's intimacy and closeness to the communities he was photographing, he had that relationship. He had that close relationship with the community, with the individual, with the person he was taking photographs of. It's also interesting in a couple of his photos that they are taken late afternoon, and you know it's a bright day because you can see his shadow transposed onto the person he's on the ground or before the person he's taking the photograph of. And he does this a lot in his later photos, and it's often led me to ponder, is this a deliberate part of his photography, is to leave his shadow on the photographs he's taken? Because he was well enough versed in photography now to know how to not have his shadow on those photographs. He deliberately, I feel, chose to place his shadow as a lasting legacy within the people he was taking photographs of, as if he was in communication, talking with them to say he's there with that person, he's behind the camera, but he's there, and here's his shadow right beside the person he's taking the photograph of. So I find that fascinating. It was very much, you get the sense of very much a spontaneous kind of approach to the snapshot, a spontaneity that I think was very much what Brady's life was, a constant movement, a constant course of action, and a constant pressing of the shutter that makes Enclosing Some Snapshots such a valuable legacy, not just for Métis and Cree photography from the 30s to the 60s, but a legacy for photography in Western Canada as a whole. So on that note, please enjoy Enclosing Some Snapshots at the Galt Lethbridge, and I hope this means a lot to you, and I would love to hear your feedback and responses through the museum. Thank you very much. Tanze.